the footballer who built Kaizer Chiefs. At just 16 years old, he was already playing for the club he had supported as a boy, Orlando Pirates. 8 years later, after becoming a football star in the United States, he returned to South Africa and helped create the club that would become Pirates' greatest rival. More than 50 years later, that club carries his name, his children help run it, and millions of supporters across Southern Africa know it simply as Amakhosi. His name is Kaizer Motaung. But before he became one of the most powerful men in South African football, supporters knew him by another name, Chincha Guluva. This is the story of how one of South Africa's greatest footballers became one of its greatest football builders. Welcome to Peak World. If you're new, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. The boy who wanted to play for Pirates. Kaizer Motaung was born on the 16th of October 1944 in Orlando East, Soweto, to Ceyland and Maponso Motaung. He was one of 9 children. Football surrounded him. Growing up in Orlando, Motaung supported Orlando Pirates and dreamed of one day wearing the famous black and white jersey himself. His father had other ideas. He wanted his son to become a lawyer, but Kaizer wanted football. And remarkably, while still only 16 years old, he broke into the Orlando Pirates senior team. Some accounts have described him as the youngest player ever to represent Pirates, although that particular record is difficult to establish conclusively. What is not in doubt is how young he was, and how quickly people began noticing his talent. Motaung could dribble. He could change direction suddenly. He was comfortable with the ball at his feet, and supporters gave him the nickname that would follow him throughout his life, Chincha Guluva. The exact linguistic origin and literal translation of the nickname have been explained differently over the years, but it became inseparable from Motaung's dazzling movement and ability to change direction with the ball. By the late 1960s, the boy who had dreamed of playing for Pirates had become one of the country's outstanding footballers. Then came an opportunity that would change his life, from Soweto to America. In 1968, Motaung traveled to the United States to join the Atlanta Chiefs in the newly established North American Soccer League after being recruited following trials held in Zambia. Think about what that meant at the time. Apartheid South Africa was increasingly isolated from international sport. Black South African footballers had extremely limited opportunities to demonstrate their abilities internationally through their own country. Yet here was a young man from Soweto suddenly playing professional football in America. And Motaung didn't go there simply to make up the numbers. He became a star. One of the most memorable moments of his debut season came against Manchester City, then the reigning champions of England. Motaung scored on his very debut in a 3-2 upset win for Atlanta. This story has sometimes become confused over the years, so the distinction is important. Motaung did not play professionally for Manchester City. He played against Manchester City for Atlanta Chiefs and scored against them. According to the official NASL historical record, Motaung's 1968 season produced 11 goals in 24 appearances, with 3 assists, a strong debut campaign that helped Atlanta Chiefs win the inaugural NASL championship and earned Motaung the league's Rookie of the Year award. The following season, in 1969, Motaung was even better. He scored 16 goals in just 15 matches, finishing as the NASL's leading scorer that year. It's worth being precise about this, because the 2 seasons are sometimes conflated in popular retellings. 1968 was his championship-winning Rookie of the Year debut season, with 11 goals. 1969 was his scoring title season, with 16. The young footballer from Orlando East had become an international star. He could have remained abroad. Kaizer Chiefs' own historical accounts say Motaung was offered an extraordinary $1 million a year contract to stay in America. Motaung himself has spoken about turning that offer down, telling the club's own website years later, "I sometimes wonder why I did that. However, I had that desire to contribute and do something back home. I saw an opportunity and I went for it." Whatever the exact figure, Motaung had genuine lucrative opportunities abroad. But something was happening back home, and it involved Orlando Pirates. Trouble at the club he loved. By 1969, Orlando Pirates was experiencing serious internal problems. There had been conflict between players, administrators, and club leadership. Among those affected was Ewart Nene, a hugely important football recruiter and administrator who would later become central to Motaung's story. Even before that conflict fully unfolded, Motaung had already begun laying informal groundwork of his own. During a brief return to South Africa in late 1968, after winning the NASL title with Atlanta, he formed an off-season exhibition side known as Kaizer 11, bringing together talented local players for friendly matches. At the time, this wasn't yet Kaizer Chiefs as we know it today. But people came to watch, and the team attracted real attention. Motaung then returned to America to complete the 1969 NASL season, finishing as the league's top scorer. When he came back to South Africa at the end of that season, the Orlando Pirates dispute had deepened. Motaung became involved in attempts to resolve the club's internal problems. They failed. And from that failure came something nobody could have imagined when the young Kaizer first pulled on an Orlando Pirates jersey. A new team, the informal Kaizer 11 side, and the players affected by the Pirates dispute, gradually became the foundation of something much bigger. Instead of simply fixing what had gone wrong at Pirates, why not create something new? The birth of Kaizer Chiefs. On the 7th of January 1970, Kaizer Chiefs Football Club was formally established. The name itself told the story. Kaizer came from Motaung. Chiefs came from Atlanta Chiefs, the American club that had given him his international opportunity. It was an extraordinary decision. Motaung had grown up supporting Orlando Pirates. He had played for Orlando Pirates. His family supported Orlando Pirates. And now he was helping build the club that would become their greatest rival. His father, who had once wanted him to become a lawyer, supported him. But building Chiefs was not easy. South African football already had established teams, administrators, and loyalties. The newcomers faced resistance. They had to recruit players. They needed supporters. They needed money. And they had to prove that Kaizer Chiefs was not simply a temporary breakaway team built around one famous footballer. This is where Motaung began showing that perhaps his greatest talent wasn't going to be football. It was building. Building Amakosi. Kaizer Chiefs recruited aggressively. One of the most important people behind that process was Ewart "the Lip" Nene. Nene had an eye for talent and became one of the key figures responsible for finding players who could strengthen the young club. Chiefs began attracting exciting footballers and, just as importantly, supporters. The club's personality was taking shape. Gold and black, entertaining football, big personalities, and an identity that increasingly stretched beyond Soweto. By 1974, only 4 years after the club's formal establishment, Kaizer Chiefs had won a major league championship, notably with Motaung contributing 13 league goals to that title, despite missing much of the season while still playing for the Denver Dynamos in the NASL. The experiment was working. Then tragedy struck. The murder of Ewart Nene. In August 1976, Ewart Nene travelled to Kwathima Springs as part of efforts to recruit a talented young footballer. Nene was stabbed to death. He had been one of the men most responsible for building Chiefs' playing strength during its early years. His death was a devastating loss. The identity of the player he was attempting to recruit has been reported differently in some retellings, so that detail deserves care rather than presenting one disputed version as certain. For Motaung, the tragedy came during an already painful period in which he also lost his father. Two important figures in the early story of Kaizer Chiefs were gone, but the club continued, and what happened next showed that Chiefs had already become bigger than the individuals who created it. Chiefs becomes a movement, Kaizer. Chiefs didn't simply accumulate trophies, it accumulated people, millions of them. Across South Africa, families began identifying themselves with the club. Parents passed their allegiance down to their children. The Soweto derby between Chiefs and Orlando Pirates became one of the great spectacles of African football. And think about the irony. The young boy from Orlando East had once dreamed of nothing more than playing for Pirates. Now, every time Chiefs faced Pirates, the club he created was competing against the club that had created him. That rivalry helped transform South African football. But Motaung understood something else very early. A successful football club could not depend only on what happened during 90 minutes. It needed administration, marketing, sponsors, supporter structures, contracts, long-term planning. Chiefs gradually became not simply a football team, but a major sporting brand. And this is where Motaung's story begins to separate from the stories of many great players. Being a brilliant footballer does not automatically make someone a brilliant club owner. Kaizer Motaung and Jomo Sono. There is perhaps no better South African comparison than Jomo Sono. Like Motaung, Sono became a legendary Orlando Pirates player. Like Motaung, he played professional football in North America with the New York Cosmos, and like Motaung, he eventually became the owner of his own South African football club. But the two men built very different legacies. Jomo Sono became famous for discovering and developing extraordinary football talent. His eye for young players became legendary. Motaung built something different. Kaizer Chiefs developed into one of the country's largest supporter institutions and most recognizable commercial sporting brands. One man became synonymous with finding footballers. The other became synonymous with building a football empire. Neither story diminishes the other, but together they show that Motaung's greatest contribution to football may have come after his greatest playing days were already behind him. Football, apartheid, and a changing South Africa. Motaung was building Chiefs during one of the most politically complicated periods in South African history. Apartheid controlled almost every aspect of life. Sport was divided by race. South Africa had been isolated internationally, and even inside the country there were fierce disagreements about whether racially integrated sporting structures represented progress or whether participating in apartheid-era sport helped legitimize the system. Motaung and other football administrators had to navigate that world. By the late 1980s, however, South Africa itself was beginning to change. In 1988, Motaung was part of a football delegation that traveled to Lusaka, Zambia, for discussions with representatives of the then-banned African National Congress. The talks formed part of wider efforts surrounding non-racial sport and the future of South African football. This was no ordinary meeting. At the time, the ANC remained banned inside South Africa. Within a few years, Nelson Mandela would be free, apartheid legislation would begin collapsing, and South African football would have to find its place in a completely new country. Motaung would help build that new football order, from club owner to football administrator. By the 1990s, Kaizer Motaung was no longer merely the owner of Kaizer Chiefs. He had become one of the country's most important football administrators. And this is where Irvin Khoza enters the story. Khoza's background was very different. Unlike Motaung, he was not a former professional Orlando Pirates player. His rise came through football administration and eventually the leadership of Orlando Pirates. The two men represented the country's greatest football rivals, but rivalry didn't prevent them from working together. In 1996, Motaung and Kaizer were among the central figures behind the creation of the Premier Soccer League. The PSL helped reshape professional football in democratic South Africa. Television, sponsorship, commercial rights, professional administration. South African club football was entering a new era. And once again, Motaung was involved in building the structure rather than merely participating in it. There is something remarkable about that journey. He had started as a teenage player, then he created a club, then he helped create the league in which that club would compete. The World Cup comes to South Africa. Motaung's influence also extended into South Africa's pursuit of the FIFA World Cup. He served on the board of the 2010 FIFA World Cup Local Organizing Committee. For Motaung personally, the journey must have been extraordinary. When he traveled to America in 1968, South African football was being pushed out of the international community because of apartheid. 4 decades later, the world's biggest football tournament was being staged in South Africa. And the young footballer, who had once needed to leave his own country to play on an international stage, was now helping organize that international stage at home. The Motaung family. There is another reason Kaizer Chiefs is unusual. More than half a century after its founding, it remains deeply connected to the Motaung family. Kaizer Motaung Jr. became sporting director. Bobby Motaung has held a senior football management role. Jessica Motaung became one of the club's most prominent executives in marketing and commercial operations. Kaizer Motaung became involved in the club's digital operations. To supporters of this model, it represents continuity. Motaung built something and gradually prepared his children to help carry it forward. To critics, it raises an obvious question. Can a club as enormous as Kaizer Chiefs continue to be managed so heavily around one family? That question has become more significant during periods when results on the field have not matched supporters' expectations. When winning became harder, for much of its history, Kaizer Chiefs supporters expected trophies. Then came difficult years. Coaches arrived and departed. Players were criticized. Management faced pressure. And a long trophy drought increasingly tested the relationship between the club and its enormous fan base. For the first time, a younger generation of Chiefs supporters began asking harder questions about the structures that had worked so successfully under Motaung for decades. Was the club changing quickly enough? Had family continuity become too comfortable? Was Chiefs still operating like the modern African football giant its supporters believed it should be? These are fair questions, but something else is equally remarkable. The club remained enormous, supporters remained, sponsors remained interested, the brand survived, and eventually Chiefs returned to major silverware. That tells us something about the institution Motaung created. A team can disappear when it stops winning. An institution can survive long enough to rebuild. Recognition. Motaung's contribution to South African sport has received major recognition. On Freedom Day, 27th April 2013, President Jacob Zuma conferred South Africa's National Order of Ikhamanga in silver upon Kaizer Motaung at the Presidential Guest House in Pretoria, one of the country's highest civilian honors. The official citation recognized his excellent achievement in the field of football and his outstanding contribution to the development of young football talent in South Africa. He has also received numerous other sporting and academic honors, including an honorary doctorate in social sciences from the University of Cape Town in 2022 and a Doctor of Commerce from the University of the Witwatersrand in 2025. But perhaps his greatest honor is something no government could award. The club survived. In 2025, Kaizer Chiefs celebrated 55 years since its founding. By then, Motaung had lived long enough to see several generations grow up supporting something he started in 1970. The legacy of Chincha Guluva. Kaizer Motaung's life is remarkable because he succeeded in two completely different worlds. First, he became a great footballer. Then he became something much rarer, a great football builder. The teenage Orlando Pirates player became an international star. The international star came home and created Pirates' greatest rival. The club founder became a businessman. The businessman became a football administrator. And the administrator helped build the Premier Soccer League and played a role in the structures surrounding the 2010 World Cup. But his greatest test may still lie ahead. For more than half a century, Kaizer Chiefs has had Kaizer Motaung at its center. His name is on the club. His family is inside its leadership. His history is inseparable from its identity. The ultimate measure of what he built may therefore come when the institution has to continue without its founder. Will Kaizer Chiefs remain as powerful for the next 50 years as it became during its first 50? If it does, then perhaps that will be the final proof that Chincha Guluva didn't simply create a successful football club. He built something capable of outliving him. What do you think is Kaizer Motaung's greatest achievement? His career as a footballer, building Kaizer Chiefs, or his contribution to South African football administration? And do you believe the Motaung family's continued leadership is one of Kaizer Chiefs' greatest strengths, or will the club eventually need a different model? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more Peak World content.